Good afternoon, everybody. We've got a barn burner. Today, we've got Jamey Rosenfield and Atul Arya from IHS, and they're going to talk to us about all kinds of things happening on the planet. You know them. Jamey is the co-founder of CIRA with Dan Jurgen. And, I think, Jamey, you're a fabulous friend. And when you think of visibility on the energy world, nothing is bigger than CIRA. And so I don't want to steal your thunder because we got a lot of great stuff to talk about. And Atul, we really appreciate having you as well, because I know one of the things we'll talk about is Indian CIRA that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So welcome, guys. If I could hit the electronic applause button, I would do it. So I'll just do that and say welcome. All right, let's jump in. Mike Bradley, what's happening on the screen today, brother?
Maynard, it's another great week so far for energy. I mean, you're seeing gas prices, crude prices, essentially anything energy associated is going up because energy prices in Europe and the U.S. are spiking here. And so, we're just going to show a few slides, but things look really, really good right now. We've talked a little bit about this, and this is just a Bloomberg Commodity Spot Index over the last 10 years. The white line is a commodity spot index, and you can see it's just broken through a 10-year high. And if you look at down here, this blue line, I really wanted to show you that is the 10-year bond, which is at 1.5%. And the reason I show this is the last time we got to these levels, we had bonds, 10 years at 3.5%, 4%. And so there is a big disconnect. And what this market, what bonds are telling you right now is that they think a lot of this inflation is transitory. And what we'd say right now is that's probably just not the case. So something has to give here. One of the things we've been talking about here, maybe for the last 4 weeks, we put up this slide. And if you look at it, this was, German power prices, UK power prices, Netherlands gas price and UK gas price. And the reason I wanted to show this is just what's happened over the last month or so. And you've seen this is what's happened over the last month. Some of these things are up anywhere from 30 to 140% over the last month. So there really is truly inflation that is occurring right now in Europe because of power prices and natural gas prices. I think a lot of people that are in the energy industry always remember seeing these economist, type stories. And now I would couch this to say that this has not been on the front cover. If it was on the front cover, it would scare the hell out of me. But it's not on the front cover. And the reason it would scare the hell out of me is it would probably tell me that prices are going down, not up. But this is one of the stories that was put out October 4th. And if you notice, it says dwindling investment in oil and gas and coal means higher prices are here to stay. Again, that is not consensus right now with people, and that's not consensus with global Fed leaders. And the last thing I kind of want to throw out here is here's some of the Bloomberg stories over the last 48 hours. And we showed this out last week, but what I think is really interesting, and I think I'm going to shout out for this to Colin here, is these first two stories is the UK sees more nuclear as a fix to the energy crisis, and nuclear gains ground to phase out gas. It's really interesting. We have not heard about nuclear being one of the areas that's going to help us out of this, but we're now starting to hear this. And some of these other things in red is China orders banks to ramp up funding to boost coal output, something we haven't heard. And also China tells guys to relax mine safety, which is kind of the last thing you want to really hear. And so it's, all these stories, you're just seeing all over all over the place, these stories of prices spiking, governments really trying to, clamp down, trying to find solutions. And the solutions are probably not there near term. The solution right now is you're going to have to take prices up high enough to cut off demand. That's something we've been saying for a while. And so, one of the last things is, two things I'd like to point out too is that, OPEC, obviously they had their meeting on Monday. They raised production by 400,000 barrels a day for November. And, the funny thing about it is they seem to be the most rational actor on the world scene at this point in time, in my opinion. That's hard to say because it's craziness. The other thing I'd point out is this last story. It says worst California oil spill in 27 years may be from a ship anchor. And a day or two ago, people were losing their minds in California and saying we got to shut the whole offshore industry up. the reason I point this out is these are the stories we don't want to see hit the wire as prices go up, because it only makes our industry look bad. And so the last two things I'd say that kind of, we put out an energy strategist note on Monday, and we pulled some C.S. Lewis quotes, and I thought it was really, really kind of painted, what's going on right now in the energy crisis in Europe. And history isn't just a story of bad people doing bad things. It's quite as much a story of people trying to do good things, but somehow something goes wrong. And what I'd say right now is in Europe, something is definitely going wrong. And the last thing is you never know how much you really believe anything. I mean, I think you can basically substitute the word green energy until its truth or falsehood becomes a matter of life and death to you. And the point I'm making is it really kind of, right now, Russia, it looks like Russia, it's getting cold. They're not sending as much exports to Europe. European gas prices are going to the moon right now. And so, green energy is great. We all love it. We want the world to get decarbonized. But you know what? When it really starts to affect you, it's really when you take notice, and that's what's occurring right now. So just a bunch of stuff, that occurred this last week to, kind of think about for the weeks ahead. But you know what? This whole energy transition is, we've said it for a while, it's probably the most inflationary thing that we've seen in the last 30 years. It seems to be proving out right now. And one of the other things I didn't show on one of those charts is I put up a Chinese silicone price chart, and you saw there was up 400 or 500% over the last couple months or so. So the point is that renewables are not going down; they too are going up in price, because guess what? A lot of those renewables are made with you guessed it, oil, fossil fuels, gas, etc. So it's not going to be an easy transition. There's going to be fits and starts along the way, and right now we're seeing one of those price runs, and it's going to take a while to get out of this.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Mike. I mean, Colin, as I listen to Mike and I think about the headlines I'm seeing, I think I saw one this morning: cotton prices hit 10-year high. Like, what is not hitting a 10-year high? What do you think? What do you got for us today?
Well, let's pick up that point right there. It just shows the interconnections between and among commodities. So obviously the direct link from energy into agricultural prices is fertilizer. Now, cotton is somewhat affected more by weather in that particular story, but we are seeing the price of potash, basically rocketing back to the 2008 highs, urea prices, and of course, it's all coming from the natural gas pass-through. So let me just show a couple of charts on where we stand today on the natural gas story. Here are three charts of prices: Japan, Korea LNG marker price here on the left, UK natural gas futures price in the middle, and then two cash prices for US natural gas on the right. Now, when we look at this, you can see here over the past 3 years, we were kind of drifting lower. And I think, as everybody knows now, the time to get really long natural gas was in the first half of 2021. One of the great strategic moves of at least the past 10 years was to anticipate that we were about to see something big happen in natural gas. To put the $35 per MMBTU LNG price in context, that is the equivalent of $206 oil, and we have not even started winter yet. UK natural gas, it hit 304 pence per therm in the Jan 22 contract. That's the first time we've ever seen a price above 300 pence per therm, and it happened in 3 or 4 of the winter contracts. That's the equivalent of $41 per MMBTU, or about $244 per barrel oil equivalent. Now, obviously, we don't have prices like that yet in the United States. We have Henry Hub at about 581 in the cash market, 625 in the prompt futures, 681 for SoCal. Going back to Winter Storm Uri, we briefly had a $136 price per MMBTU in the SoCal cash market, giving us a taste of the kind of parabolic move that could come. That's the equivalent of $800 per barrel oil equivalent, but it only lasted for a very brief period of time. These are much more durable moves that are pushing into industry, into power, into fertilizer, as we said. And here's what the fundamental situation looks like. The European natural gas in storage is at about 75% of storage capacity. Normal this time of year would be closer to 90%. We have working gas inventory at about 839 terawatt hours, to use the units that the Europeans use. The largest stores are in Italy, 170 terawatt hours, 86% full. Germany has 160, France 120, Netherlands 84. So that handful of countries is just about 2/3 of the total for the entire EU. Now that excludes Ukraine, which of course is vitally important for this consideration. And Ukraine has about 145 terawatt hours, or about 46% of its domestic storage capacity. Now, that's where we're at today. And as you can see, we haven't even really got to the start of the normal roller coaster going into winter. And when we dial forward, this would be the path if the potential inventory process matched normal in terms of inventory draws through a normal winter. So think of this as normal temperature in the middle of winter gives me kind of this red dotted path. Essentially gets me to the lowest inventories that we've ever seen in the European market, the equivalent of about 22% of full storage capacity. And if it happened to be colder than normal, we'd get somewhere down to here, about 11%. And so this is what the market is worried about. Prices have to move to the levels that we've seen because this is not going to be allowed to happen. We are already starting to ration demand, and in fact, even to use a phrase, destroy demand in the sense of shutting down fertilizer plants. And then finally, because this is all of an interconnected system, we have to ask about what's happening in other fractions that could perhaps offer some substitution effects. And so we've seen more and more questions about crude oil for direct burn and power, and even propane and some of the natural gas liquids and how they might help us out on the margin for heating purposes. When you see cash at Mont Belvieu at 151 in the propane market, we were at 20 cents when we got to the start of the COVID period. So that is quite a large move. And to reiterate, we haven't even started winter yet.
Wow, guys. Well, I think that's thanks for that, and it's a great lead in to Jamey and Atul, because what's happening around the planet, guys, in energy is amazing. From India to China to California to Texas to Europe and so many other places. CIRA, as an organization, nobody's been better at understanding global energy than CIRA over the years. So it's a delight to have you. I promise I won't ask you, Jamey, I won't pin you down on why propane is doing what it's doing. But what do you think? What are you hearing? You guys are getting ready for India CIRA as well as the CIRA next spring. Jamey, what are you hearing from energy clients and others as you talk to them about the coming show?
Thank you, Maynard. And I just want to pick up on something that Michael said. This is a very big week in the energy industry. And one of the reasons it's a very big week in the energy industry is because of the announcement that was made. And I just want to raise a glass in toast to Maynard on behalf of all of us on the call, all of your colleagues, people on this who are listening in, who really appreciate your contributions to the industry over so many years, your leadership and your friendship. So I'm raising this glass to you.
You're way too nice, Jamey. Your friendship, and when it comes to energy leadership, Sarah, you guys wrote the book. So I'll take that compliment. Way too nice.
So, I think the points that Colin and Michael made really reverberate, especially with the CIRA Week that what we call the India Energy Forum by CIRA Week that's about to take place. That you really set the stage. These issues and this volatility in markets, which I would characterize as an aggregate disruption and really creating dislocations, not only in terms of markets, but in terms of politics and society, social impacts. And if you take that point about propane prices, that really affects the India energy transition in India, which we'll talk more about. Natural gas prices and oil prices at the levels they are now have huge implications for the consuming countries, such as India, which is, of course, the fastest growing consuming country. We think this volatility, as we go through this energy transition, is not going to abate. It's going to continue. And so it really sets the stage for what we're calling not energy transition, but energy transitions with an S, reflecting the fact that we're seeing energy transition happening in very different ways in different parts of the world. and that's really will inform our CERAWeek Houston. But to go to CERAWeek India, this event is taking place in 2 weeks' time in New Delhi. This is the 5th annual event. It's under the patronage of the Energy Ministry, in particular the new Minister Puri, who now has his hands full after only a few weeks in office. Why don't I turn? Atul is the architect of the agenda. He's the chief energy strategist at IHS Markit. Has a background both as a petroleum engineer, but also as was the CEO of BP Solar. So this is a man who's seen the full spectrum and was also head of strategy at BP before we were able to recruit him to join us. So Atul, do you want to give some of the headlines that you see on the horizon vis-a-vis the agenda for India?
Yeah, so thank you, Jamey, and Maynard, congratulations. Before we talk about India, let me just very briefly reflect on Colin, you and Michael's excellent slides. I think what we are seeing is this massive dislocation. Our view is that this transition, if you go back to the history of transitions, prior transitions have all been driven by some change in fuel or energy system, which is better functionality at a lower cost. Now, and driven by technology and markets, this transition is being driven by regulation and governments, and it's going to be really messy. And we haven't seen anything yet, as we say.
Atul, yeah. I think you're implying that a regulation and governments are not quite as good as technology and markets. But I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, as they say, from the famous Casablanca, I'm shocked. I really am shocked, right? So that's what I would say. No, I think that's the challenge. It's really a very haphazard way of forcing transition. And before I come to India, the only other thing I would say that this is what I've been saying to the clients I've been talking with in the last few weeks is that energy is not software. Version change takes years, maybe decades. Most of the people who are dealing with energy in the Congress and all think, 10 minutes, software change, we get to the new version. That's what they want to do with energy. And that's a huge mistake. So I hope they learn something from what is happening, around the world, including all the dislocations we have seen in the US. So now very quickly to coming to India. India is really important and we are very excited. This is our 5th year of the India Energy Forum. And we have a tremendous lineup of, let me just say some speakers and then I'll talk about the big themes. So we have, of course, India is a very large consumer of energy. So everybody has to kind of go and pay their dues. So we have the Saudi minister speaking. We have the Qatari minister speaking, Al-Kabi. We have the Dr. Sultan speaking, Jennifer Granholm speaking. So you can see the who's of the world of energy, power, politically speaking. And of course, India has a new minister for energy, and he will be the host, as Jamey says. In terms of the companies, Bernard Looney, BP has big business in India. Patrick Pouyanné, who's Total has grown their presence in India very significantly. We have Lorenzo Simonelli, big ambitions for Baker Hughes, and as they transform themselves to a technology company speaking. We have Jean-Pascal Tricoire from Schneider. We have other CEOs, and of course, we have, of course, Barkindo. So we'll hear from OPEC, and of course, India and OPEC has a bit of a love-hate relationship at high prices. It's a really big challenge for India in terms of the kind of crude oil prices they are seeing. Fatih Birol from IEA is also speaking. So lots of great.
Atul, we're missing one very important person.
Who is that?
Maynard Holt. I think we need to.
Oh, Maynard, of course. Yes.
Hey, can I ask a quick question? Not to get us off of that fun topic. Just big picture for everyone. India, daily demand, growth rates. Atul, do you happen to have any of just the basic numbers around Indian energy consumption?
Yeah, India is about close to 4 million barrels a day. It's back up to where it was pre-pandemic and going up. India is importing over 90% of its crude oil right now. So, any increase in the price has a big impact. And one of their big priorities is more domestic exploration. They have not been successful. And Exxon just made a very big deal in India. So Exxon will be present in in a big way. So that's a big priority for them. In the same way, in biofuels is a big priority because they think they can compensate for some of the, the liquid barrels via biofuels and grow the domestic biofuels production. Another big worry is natural gas. Although natural gas is not a big factor in power generation, it's mostly coal. But natural gas is really important for fertilizers, as we all know. And so they can't keep the population hungry, so they have to have that gas for fertilizer. And we heard this from the minister just a few days back, that's really hurting their farmers because the prices are just going through the roof. The other big thing they're focusing on is hydrogen. So in 15th of August is India's Independence Day. On this year, the Prime Minister announced a national hydrogen mission, and India to become a leader in green hydrogen with a combination of solar, really plentiful, cheap solar PV, and then converting that into hydrogen through electrolysis. So that's a big focus area. Of course, the supply chains, and we talked a little bit earlier about the cost of everything going up. So they want to build that in India. So that's another big focus area for that. Just to give a flavor, India is the fourth largest consumer of energy and the fourth largest emitter of CO2. So other big kind of elephant in the room we will tackle is what is India going to do in Glasgow? And our view is that what India will say and do, a lot of countries will pay attention to more than China, because many countries relate to India's democratic system and rule of government and all of that. So that will be a hugely important topic. And I think money is going to be the big factor in Glasgow. And we'll talk about money. And Maynard, with you coming, we'll talk even more about money as to how can India get money. One of the big challenges for India is the cost of borrowing for energy infrastructure is very high. And how do they get that cost down so that they can finance their energy transition? And they don't want to follow the European path or the American path. Transition in India is going to be the Indian way, messy, multiple transitions. But they are committed, and they have 1 billion people. Some of them are quite smart, so hopefully they will all contribute to that transition.
Are there any things, Jamey or Atul, being debated in India that might really improve the course of their? Because the problem is not just transition. The problem, right? It's like it's power, cheaper power, more reliable power. There's all kinds of things, economic development broadly, and the transition. Are there anything being kicked around that could meaningfully change the course? Like, what's the debate? Anything else they could do? What do you make of that discussion?
The number one debate in India, which has been for a while, Maynard, is coal. Okay, coal is the biggest source of emission, the biggest source of power, one of the biggest sources of employment, not just for the mining industry, but for the railway industry, because they move a lot of coal. So when John Kerry flies into India and says, shut down your coal and don't grow, they say, really? Where are you coming from? So that is the big debate. Of course, coal has other bad effects on your health, with the ash and all the emissions. So coal has to be dealt with, and they're really struggling to figure out how could. And coal is, by the way, baseload power. Gas is not the baseload power in India, right? So what is the next baseload power for you? Is it nuclear or is it something else? I think that's the big debate. Maynard, in India. How do you?
But Atul hasn't. India's made a big bet on natural gas, and seeing these prices spike like this has really created a tremendous backlash within India, and that they thought prices were high before.
Yeah, it's a very big challenge for them. The charts we saw. The only thing they're using gas for right now is fertilizer. By the way, the other big issue they have is LPG, which they were very proud to move all the domestic cooking from coal and biomass to LPG, but now look at the LPG prices. So the housewives are having to go back to using other fuels, including coal, by the way, which is not good for health, but it's a lot cheaper than buying a cylinder of LPG.
What an irony that we're kicking up coal use as a result of all this stuff. That's a Europe story as well.
One of the few things I've learned in my 40 years of energy is the law of unintended consequences.
That sounds like the C.S. Lewis law, right, Mike?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Atul and Jamey. I know you said you're going to have this India conference in about 2 weeks, and I just see these stories about coal inventories in India being at like all-time lows at 4 days of inventory, and I'm just hoping that you guys are going to be able to have the lights on when you're there. But yeah, I think my question is it seems like it's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, a lot of pressure is being pushed onto India to really kind of get the coal use down, and I think they at least from what I understand is that they've people want a commitment from them at COP26, right? I mean, given what's gone on at this point in time in the last couple of months, I mean, how is this transitioning changing for people? Can they change? I mean, can they really change? It would seem like if I was 3 months ago, I had a plan going in, that my plan might just have been scrapped literally in the last 3 weeks because I have to step back and decide, what, this might not be the right move for us because we're already seeing what's going on. I mean, how do you think over the last couple of weeks and months, maybe some of these plans, some of the pressures being put on by the U.S. and others has really changed, and, particularly in India, and maybe we can talk about China in a little bit.
Yeah, I think in India, India is kind of walking a very tight rope here because there are many people in India, the elite and the administrative people who want to be part of the solution for COP. They don't want to kind of go in and spoil the party, if you would. But at the same time, they feel that India historically has emitted a lot less carbon than many other countries have. It has a right to grow and develop. But they know coal is a problem. Coal is causing health problems. So we're actually going to have one of the top environmentalists at India and Maynard. You better go and talk to her when she's there, Dr. Sunita Narayan. She's a firebrand, and she will be there. And she's been committed to dealing with the air pollution and the water pollution. So I think my sense is that India will make some kind of a bargain to say slowly decline coal use, but give us the money. Bring us the technology. I mean, for example, one thing which I think could happen in India, particularly offshore, India has a huge shoreline, is CCS in offshore India, not on onshore. Onshore is too densely populated. So can you get some technology from US and Europe for offshore CCS? I think that's the kind of thing. Technology for hydrogen, another one they want. And of course, China is always there. Yeah, sorry.
You mentioned in passing, but their focus on E&P because they'd like to get some investment in their upstream as part of their energy transition away from coal.
Why isn't there, guys? This is an unfair question. It seems like when the issues are so complex, we're making this really hard, and India talking about green hydrogen and stuff like that. Like that seems. It seems like why isn't the U.S. doing a bilateral deal with India we'll finance 10 LNG regas facilities, and please sign a long-term contract to buy U.S. natural gas, and let's get going and let's fix this problem. Like, why is there not more stuff like that?
Yeah, there is actually, Maynard, it's a really great question. Actually, there was a U.S.-India clean energy agreement, I think signed about 2 or 3 months back. But I mean, my sense is that the current administration is feeling, a bit ambivalent about natural gas, right? Many in the administration want to promote natural gas, but others do not. And I completely agree with you with the abundance of natural gas we have here in the U.S., a deal to say, okay, we'll send you with some kind of a price guarantee, which India will need, would be a great way to build that. India is importing a lot of U.S. natural gas, LNG, but at this current prices, it's just not feasible. A longer-term relationship will be a win-win and by the way, India has also got an issue with balance of trade with the U.S., so that will help the U.S., export more natural gas. That's a big. By the way, we're going to have a big session. Michael Smith is coming in from Freeport to talk about LNG, so we're looking forward to that.
So the real issue, supply, right? So, Atul, it's not financing the regas. It's relaxing the standard, relaxing regulations to allow more gas to be produced in the United States, because you have this, this rigid supply curve Whereas on the demand side, so you're seeing now demand destruction, as Maynard was saying. The issue is supply.
So, Jamey, does all of this backdrop, we've got, I mean, India, this sounds like you really do have something, it's a fantastic program coming together, but everything that's going on broadly in energy, this seems like this is going to make CIRA a must attend in Houston.
I mean, thank you for saying that. India is a microcosm of what we're seeing around the world. This really incredible amalgam of issues and uncertainties. And in the 40 years that I've been doing CIRA Week, since now back in the early 80s, I've never seen a time of more uncertainty, more kind of dissonance. And so I think that then the questions are very big. So I've never seen a bigger need for the industry to gather, and with policymakers, with financial community, with the tech community, and really talk about these issues and think through in a hopefully, we try to do it CIRA Week, in a rational, clear-headed way, away from the polemics. So I think it is one of the biggest inflection points in my career anyway. The stakes are so high. The issues we're talking about are specific to energy, but think about the geopolitical context for this. And we will be talking a lot about this at CIRA Week, cross-border adjustments. These energy, as Dan wrote in the prize, it's about relationship between nations and the future of those relationships. The other question that you posed is the economics. Who pays for this? How can you have well-functioning capital markets with all of the distortions that are being introduced, which really create a lot of perverse outcomes? And, my alma mater just decided to divest itself of fossil fuels. My question to the leadership there is, are they divesting themselves of fossil fuels? And it doesn't seem to be that they are. So, there's a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of polemics, as I said. Another big question is the role of technology and innovation. And, I think, Atul, you made the point, transitions take time. Scaling innovation from discovery to development to deployment takes time and capital. And so the cost of capital becomes paramount. And we're seeing now a whole new wave of innovation that will be driven by the transition. We'll be focusing in our Agora, Innovation Agora, and TPH has played a key role in bringing the voice of innovation to CIRA Week. The startups and all of many of the folks who have participated in this Close of Business Tuesday dialogues. We intend to really focus and ramp up our focus on technology and innovation at CIRA Week. We had Bill Gates last time. We also had the CEO now of Amazon, Andy Jassy. Those are the folks who really use this opportunity to talk about innovation. The newest thing I'll just mention as a preview is that all of the countries and many companies are making net zero commitments. It's either 2030, 2040, 2050. So the commitments are being made. The challenge is, how do you actually get there? What are the actual solutions to drive to that? And so we're introducing this year at CIRA Week, I'm calling it the Net Zero Village, as a convening ground for people from across the different communities to really go deep on what does a hydrogen ecosystem look like? What does it really take to create a hydrogen hub? Atul mentioned in India, there's one that's being contemplated for the Gulf Coast. We want to go deep on that. We want to go deep on this concept of electrification of everything. So that seems to be the chosen pathway. Electrification of everything is going to require something called storage. Lithium turns out to be, require an awful lot of mining. What are the different pathways for electrification? What's the infrastructure requirements? And then finally, the third hub, I'm calling it, is negative carbon. And what are all the pathways for carbon abatement? Because we're clearly going to have hydrocarbons. So we're going to have hydrocarbon abatement solutions, which covers CCS, which covers nature-based solutions, a myriad of pathways. So we really want to go deep into how do we move from the hype and the talk around decarbonization to the reality, the reality and the realistic pathways to get there.
Jamey, I think, Colin and I were just talking to a client before this call, and it's a client that's making great progress on what they're doing next year and the year after. And we started asking ourselves, wouldn't it be really more beneficial to this whole thing if people were making 2023 pledges or 2024 pledges so that we could hold current management accountable for doing that? All these 2050 pledges that are so hard to hit that someone else will be, responsible for. It seems like I understand kind of sort of how we got off on this, but it almost seems to be counterproductive.
Yeah, let me pick this up. You're spot on. I'm smiling because I just gave a talk to a bunch of CEOs on the chemical business yesterday, European CEOs, and I said, it's very convenient to do a 2030 or 2050 target because most of us will not be around, right? So it's somebody else's problem.
It's hard to believe, but I think it's true.
Unfortunately it is. But by the way, the other thing I would say is that I think net zero, I hope we stop talking about net zero and start talking about emissions. And also I hope we stop talking about decarbonization, because carbon is not the problem, it is the emissions which are the problem. And talk about reducing emissions, which is the ultimate goal everywhere in the world. And you're spot on. So I think my message is, set some short-term targets, because both your shareholders and your employees will reward you for that. That's what is much more meaningful. And they may not be, very ambitious, but at least they're targets which you can deliver, right?
Well, it kind of reminds me of, when I have a diet plan and I say 1 year out, I come up with like my college weight. I come up with something ridiculous, but when it's next week, it's a little more possible. Anyway, let me ask you another question, Jamey. I'm struck by this one because Atul's lead-in was really interesting about we're not using markets and technology to accomplish our objectives here. We're using governments and regulation. Is there a strain to the energy transition, which is a little bit anti-business? Does it seem that way? I've never really thought of it that way, but there seems to it has that flavor sometimes. Or
I would say that your statement might be the understatement of this conference call.
Okay. Well,
this is driven by
anti-capitalism, just to widen it out a bit. But there's something about this which is it obviously. We don't have our usual forces turned on, and in fact, we seem to be, trying to do some damage at some level.
Well, at the core of this is the fundamental issues of trust and the perception that the industry that we all work in somehow is not committed to delivering what society wants, and therefore needs to be forced and browbeaten in some cases into doing that. And it seems to me that there really is a deep lack of trust that pervades the entire conversation around energy transition.
Well, and when I say anti-business, I'm actually struck by like anti-all business, not just the energy industry, because this is showing up everywhere. Just it's such a huge thing.
That's right. There's some deep ideological issues here, and it's the latest of a series of attacks on free markets.
Yeah, I think though, Maynard, I'm interested. I mean, how would you rate the industry in their response? Sometimes I feel the industry is a bit too timid and not willing to speak out. I'm generalizing this grossly, but what is your sense and you guys?
I'll take a stab at it, and we'd be the first to say we're industry sympathizers, because we're so impressed with all the things that industry does right, and all the things the industry does for everybody else. It seems like the industry has a problem with form and how it talks about these things. In substance, it feels like it's constantly getting better. And the other substance of this is, when I think about real change and real progress and really solving this problem, I'm completely convinced that our existing energy industry is the one that's going to step in and, quote, fix all this, because they got the talent, they got the engineering, they know how to do it. But I do feel like we've got to continue to work on our form and how we communicate all this stuff.
I would say that one definition of a functioning democracy is you have no idea what the name of your lieutenant governor is. And I would say one definition of a functioning, exceptionally well-functioning energy system is you turn on the lights, you flip the switch, and you have no idea how or why it works, but you expect it to be 100% reliable at a totally reasonable cost. And if as a student of history, and Jamey, I know you're a student of history, we're all students of history on this call. When you look at everything that's happened over the last 150 years, it is absolutely flabbergasting how important energy was to deliver not just free markets, but freedom itself. And you can't persuade me that the next 2 billion people to come don't want the exact same thing. So the challenge is on the table. I think the challenge is already getting picked up. Obviously, our industry often has made mistakes and has problems with communication, but overall, it is pretty stunning how ruthlessly competitive this industry is and how unbelievably competent it is.
All right, we're getting all fired up here.
Michael, you're going to chime in, but I'll just say to Colin, Colin, you and I both live you're in Wellesley, Massachusetts.
Don't say it too loudly, Jamey. I got my Houston hat on back there.
All right, sorry for, but I will say that, there are wildly different perceptions. What we know this industry is about is very different from what people in our neck of the woods in the Northeast believe the industry is about. They don't understand what that statement you made about which is a true statement. And so the industry has dealt with this perception issue going back to John D. Rockefeller. And I think right now it ought to be and needs to be, in response to the earlier comment, forward leaning and saying, yes, we are the ones who are going to solve this problem. That's one of the reasons of creating this net zero village. It's at CERAWeek. Sorry, Atul, for the use of net zero, but I think the industry needs to step up and say, we're the ones who are going to be solving this problem. We're the ones who are going to be coming up with the engineering, and we need the capital, and don't vilify us and don't divest, because the cost of capital is going up for the large oil companies relative to some much smaller renewables companies. And that's going to make it harder, not easier, to finance and invest in this transition.
So, Jamey, anybody coming on the agenda this spring that's going to surprise us? I know you always do a great job of including, tech companies and political leaders and authors and people from all over. Any surprises coming? Anything you can tease us with?
If I told you now, then it wouldn't be a surprise.
Well, we might, sell some more sponsorships or tickets. I mean, you don't have to give us. This is like, Christmas Eve, you get to open one present. I mean, just give us one thing.
I think we'll have a surprise appearance by Maynard Holt.
Now you lost your audience, Mike. I'm sorry. You had something, Mike. I jumped in.
Yeah, just kind of a question. I mean, it struck me a little while ago. You said that, Jamey, that society wants, clean energy, emission reductions, and I would totally agree with that. But I think society doesn't want power that is prohibitively expensive, and it really makes me wonder. If you look at the media and politicians, I think their foundation is that fossil fuels are discretionary until they're not, right? And so I'm thinking about, how are these politicians going to change their tune over the next couple months? Is it going to be a blame game against it's these crazy fossil fuel companies are raising gas prices, are raising coal prices. It's their fault. It's not our fault. Or are we going to have a really coming to Jesus where they say, you know what? We need to slow down. We need to basically rethink this thing. Maybe I'm an optimist, and maybe I hope that happens, but what are your guys' thoughts about that? You think there's going to be a general retrenchment to say, okay, maybe we didn't go about this right. Maybe we need to think back. And does that really actually kind of, are we seeing a warning sign for the U.S. that, you know what, let's not go too fast with this. Let's slow down, learn from the lessons of Europe, and do it right. Some thoughts from you guys.
Yeah, I think, Michael, you're right on the U.S.-Europe kind of the differentiation. I think we will see the blame game and all of that. We're already seeing that, in Europe. And I think Europe is going to be the leading indicator for what happens in the U.S. My feeling is in the U.S., as we start to hit $100 oil price, if we get there, there'll be a lot of push on OPEC and OPEC Plus to say, hey, guys, it's about time you open taps a bit more. So I think the U.S. will be more oil focused. We're not seeing astronomical gas prices, and overall the energy system is pretty stable. What happens in Europe is going to be important because Europe has been at the front end of the transition, and they are seeing the impact of that. So, and what is most interesting is I think Maynard made a reference to it that we are only, believe it or not, we are 4 weeks yesterday from COP meeting. So COP meeting is going to happen in Glasgow, and they may all be freezing, by the way. Okay, I hope they have some, some good wind blowing in that time of the year in Scotland. So that would be a real interesting juxtaposition that energy system is coming to a standstill, and they want to change the energy system by edict.
To pick up on that, one is what's been very interesting is the role that financial institutions and asset managers in particular are playing in driving some of these policies and decisions. It used to be said that the regulators focused on finance. Now we're seeing the financiers focus on regulation, and they're really this inversion. If you look at what some of these companies are large asset managers are doing to drive change and to push the energy transition to the boundaries. Second thing I'd just say on your larger point, when is there a reckoning? I fear that it could get to the point where we see a tremendous economic adjustment. That is, what I worry about is that the politicians are not going to be able to admit that they made a mistake. It's not part of the DNA of most people, particularly the folks who are really extremists on this. And we may go through what we went through in the 1980s, which was a severe economic disruption, stagflation, all of the things that happened. We started this call with Michael and Colin talking about unprecedented episodes of inflation, which are, kind of little flashpoints. But ultimately, if this continues, we could see very high energy prices, high cost of capital, driving a lot of a tremendous recession, and that's what it might take. I think to put the brakes on this. It's a pessimistic thing, and I hope it doesn't happen. But there's some recent studies that really look at the aggregate cost of energy transition and getting it wrong. We're talking about the driver of the global economy.
Well, it seems like there's two things that stick out in this. There's probably 50, but two we haven't mentioned at least. One is if you really care about energy transition, if that is the number one cause in your life, then what's happening right now is the biggest threat to energy transition imaginable. because it will lose support. And that's sort of a fascinating, unfortunate reality of all this. And the second one, and this is where I think energy companies are really good at, is, we think in like a finding cost mentality. How much did we spend? How much did we reduce the problem? And when you just look at all this stuff and ask, how have we improved the problem? We haven't. And that's just a practical question. And so, hopefully we get focused on the practicality of all this. It's really striking.
Maynard, Mike and I had a chat with the Wall Street Journal reporter earlier this week, and we were talking about that question of, kind of the political perception of a tough price, and when a market actually has to get a job done in constraining demand. And obviously already at $3.25 gasoline, there's a political problem. At $4, obviously that political problem gets worse. And the kind of question on the table is, well, what's the price where the market has to go to get it done? To have that day of reckoning, to Jamey's point, if you made a policy mistake, you curtailed supply too soon, and so the market has to adjust, it has to clear. And I look at that $800 per barrel price for one day. Well, that's $19 a gallon. I think we all agree that's probably not the price we're going to. But we probably all have our own view on where it is. $4 is a problem, $5 is a problem, and so on. I guess the question is, Jamey, we're already seeing natural gas prices give $35, $40 handles, which was supposedly impossible even 2 months ago. Many experts would have said impossible. What's your view on what could happen with oil if we go into something similar and we have to pay the piper for a policy mistake?
Well, we've seen, this isn't our first rodeo. We've seen what happens when oil prices spike like that. We see politicians attacking the oil industry. First of all, they go after that'll be the first thing in the crosshairs. Then attacking the exporting countries and pleading with the Saudis and the Middle Eastern folks to increase their exports. And that's where the geopolitics gets interesting. So you start to see the convergence or the overlap of geopolitics and politics and energy. It's almost predictable. In fact, it is predictable. I'll make the prediction. There will be a political and geopolitical backlash as over the next several years as we see these spikes. Atul, I'm not supposed to do that because Atul is the chief energy strategist and he knows a lot more about this than I do. But
I think, my broader point will be what we're talking about, the energy transition. And there is a mental model. I think let's just call it a US, European mental model for that transition. I think that's going to be severely challenged because we are seeing that model is coming apart, right? So the question is, what is the new model? And I think it's interesting. One of the points I made in my CEO roundtable yesterday was exactly that. See, the oil and gas companies and the chemical companies are really important because they put, and I was part of one, we put steel in the ground. Ultimately, energy transition will be all about putting steel in the ground and concrete in the ground. And no matter how much talking people do, that's what we need to do. And so, I think the mental model is going to be severely challenged.
Is that why the price of met coal has gone through the roof? Because they're trying to put steel in the ground. So the more steel you put in the ground, the higher the price of met coal.
Yes.
And for coal.
Yeah, I think just one very quick point. I think one of the headlines you showed was the comeback of nuclear, right? So we will see these kind of terms. I think, and by the way, the challenge is you can't just turn the flip switch back and say, oh, let's get more nuclear back on, right? And I think that's going to be the dislocation in the US, but all over the world, actually.
Well, guys, I think you've given us a lot to think about. The India as an example that we're all watching and thinking about all those challenges, and then kind of thinking about the rest of the world. It's a great window for us to all look through and think about if we want to jump out. But we really appreciate it. Last question, Jamey, just real quick. Dan Jurgen is a great friend of all of us. How is our friend Dan doing? What's the Dan report?
Dan is doing so well. I mean, he's right now a little bit like a one-armed paper hanger because of all the demands and requests for him to be an expert and provide the kind of grounded perspective of what is happening, crossing those borders between the industry and the policy community, and providing a very rational perspective. So he's really, I think, never before been as charged up in terms of relevant, and feeling that he really needs to. He has a responsibility. I think he feels a deep sense of responsibility to provide a rational, clear-headed voice at a time when there's so many shrill voices. And so I know he takes it very seriously. He takes that responsibility very seriously.
Well, he does a great job, and you guys do a great job. And we just want to say thank you again. And we can't wait to learn more as CIRA comes through in the spring here in Houston.
Yep. Well, March 7th to 11th, we hope to see all of you there, all of our friends, and appreciate the support.
Thanks, everybody.